My husband didn't just discard me. He framed me in an organized scheme that carries a heavy charge and an enormous term. Now, my mysterious billionaire boss has revealed a hidden room that proves my own family has been plotting my downfall from the shadows. The rain wasn't just falling, it was punishing. It lashed against the windshield of my old, rattling sedan as I sat in the driveway of the house I had called home for 3 years. On the porch stood my mother-in-law, Margaret, clutching her silk robe around her as if my very presence were a cold draft she needed to shut out. Beside her stood Mark, my husband, or the man I thought was my husband. He wouldn't look at me. He just stared at his expensive leather shoes, the ones I had bought him for his birthday when we were still happy. "I told you, Elena," Margaret's voice carried over the thunder, sharp and brittle. "A man of Mark's caliber needs a partner who contributes, not a charity case. Since you lost your position at the firm, you've become nothing but a ghost in this house, and I won't have ghosts haunting my son's future." "Mark, please," I whispered. Though he couldn't hear me through the glass, I had lost my job because I took time off to care for him after his surgery. I had sacrificed my career for this family, and now, because I couldn't find a new one within her acceptable time frame, I was being discarded like yesterday's trash. My suitcases were already soaked on the pavement, tossed out 10 minutes ago. Mark finally looked up, but there was no love in his eyes, only a pathetic, exhausted compliance. He stepped back into the warmth of the foyer and Margaret slammed the door. The click of the deadbolt echoed in my soul. I had $42 in my bank account and a gas tank that was hovering dangerously close to empty. For 2 weeks, I lived out of that car, washing my face in gas station sinks and eating protein bars I'd scavenged from a clearance bin. I applied for everything: waitressing, retail, warehouse work, but the gap in my resume and my bedraggled appearance during walk-ins seemed to scare everyone off. Then I saw the ad on a specialized boutique job board. It was simple, almost cryptic. Discreet housekeeper needed for private estate. Extreme attention to detail required. High compensation. Total anonymity guaranteed. I didn't care about the anonymity. I cared about the high compensation. I drove 3 hours north to a massive iron gate nestled in the thickest part of the woods. A camera swiveled toward my car, and a moment later, the gates buzzed open. The driveway felt like it went on for miles, winding through perfectly manicured grounds that looked more like a fortress than a garden. When the house finally appeared, it took my breath away. It was a monolith of black glass and cold steel, perched on the edge of a cliff overlooking the gray, churning ocean. A man in a sharp gray suit met me at the door. He didn't ask for my name. He just handed me a thick stack of papers. "The non-disclosure agreement," he said, his voice robotic. "If you breathe a word of what you see inside these walls, you won't just be fired. You will be facing a massive attempt to break your life through legal prosecution. We call it an organized scheme to ensure total silence. Do you understand?" I signed it without reading. I had nothing left to lose. The job was unlike anything I'd ever experienced. I was given a uniform, slate gray, high-tech fabric, and a list of rules. I was never to speak to the owner. I was never to enter the East Wing unless specifically instructed, and I was never, under any circumstances, to touch the locked drawers in the master study. The owner was Alexander Sterling. I only saw him in flashes, a tall, imposing silhouette moving through the shadows of the glass corridors. He was a billionaire who had made his fortune in security solutions, but the rumors said he was the man the government called when they needed something handled quietly. One evening, 2 weeks into the job, I was cleaning the glass floor of the main gallery. The sun was setting, turning the ocean into a pool of liquid lead. I noticed a smudge on the wall. No, not a smudge, a hairline fracture in the paneling. My curiosity, the one thing I should have kept in check, got the better of me. I pressed against it, and a section of the wall hissed open, revealing a hidden staircase spiraling downward. I knew I should turn back. I knew the internal security review the man in the suit mentioned would be brutal if I were caught. No, something drew me in. I crept down the stairs, the air growing colder and smelling of ozone and expensive cologne. At the bottom was a room filled with glowing monitors, wall to wall. I gasped, my hand flying to my mouth. The screens weren't showing stock markets or security feeds of the estate. They were displaying dozens of private homes. My heart stopped when I saw the screen in the center. It was a high-definition feed of Margaret's living room. There was Mark sitting on the sofa, and Margaret pacing back and forth holding a small, familiar-looking velvet box. Suddenly, the lights in the room flickered, and a cold, deep voice vibrated through the small space, coming from the shadows behind me. "Do you like what you see, Elena? Or should we zoom in on the moment they decided to frame you?" I spun around, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. Standing in the doorway, his eyes glowing with a terrifying intensity in the dark, was Alexander Sterling, and in his hand he held a file with my name on it, thick with photos I had never seen before. I froze, the air in the room suddenly feeling too thin to breathe. Alexander Sterling didn't move. He just leaned against the doorframe, his expensive suit blending into the shadows. The wall of monitors behind me continued to flicker, casting a rhythmic blue light over his sharp features. I'm sorry, I stammered, my voice trembling. I saw the panel. I didn't mean to. "Stop lying, Elena. It's beneath you," he interrupted, his voice like velvet over gravel. He stepped into the light, tossing the folder onto a sleek metal table between us. It slid across the surface, stopping right in front of me. "You didn't stumble upon this. You've been looking for answers since the moment you stepped into this house. You just didn't know which questions to ask." I looked down at the folder. My hand shook as I opened it. Inside were bank statements I didn't recognize, digital signatures that looked exactly like mine, and photos of a storage unit I had never visited. "What is this?" I whispered. "That," Sterling said, gesturing to the screens, "is the reason your mother-in-law kicked you out. Margaret and Mark didn't just want you gone because you were a ghost. They needed a scapegoat. They've been involved in an organized scheme for years, moving prohibited substances through a network of shell companies. When the internal security check started closing in on them, they needed someone to take the fall, someone with a clean record and no family left to fight for them." I felt the world tilt. My husband, the man I had nursed back to health, had used my name to sign for shipments of illegal materials. They hadn't just discarded me, they had set a timer on my life. Any day now, the authorities would find those storage units, and I would be facing an enormous term, decades behind bars for crimes I didn't even understand. "Why are you telling me this?" I asked, looking up at him. "And why are you watching them?" Sterling walked closer, his presence overwhelming. He smelled of rain and iron. "Because Margaret's group stole something from me, something much more valuable than money. I've been tracking their organized scheme for months, waiting for a way in, and then they threw you out. The perfect witness, the woman who knows the layout of their home, their schedules, and their secrets." He reached out, his thumb tracing the edge of a photo on the screen, the one of Mark and Margaret in their living room. "I didn't hire you to clean my house, Elena. I hired you because you are the only person who can get back inside that house without raising an alarm. I need you to go back." "They'll never let me back in," I said, a bitter laugh escaping my throat. "Margaret made it very clear what she thinks of me." "They will let you in if you have something they need," Sterling replied. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small encrypted drive. "This contains proof of their latest shipment. If they know you have this, they won't kill you. Not yet. They'll try to negotiate. They'll invite you in to talk. And while you're there, you're going to plant a device that will give me full access to their private server." "You're asking me to risk my life," I said, my heart pounding. "If they catch me, they won't just call the police. They'll make sure I disappear." "I will be watching every second," Sterling promised, his voice low and intense. and in exchange, I will make sure those charges against you vanish. I will give you enough money to start a new life anywhere in the world. And Mark, I'll make sure he spends the rest of his life wishing he'd never heard your name." I looked back at the screen. Mark was laughing now, pouring Margaret a glass of wine. They looked so happy, so relieved to be rid of me. The anger that had been simmering in my chest for weeks finally boiled over. It was a cold, sharp feeling. "Fine," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "I'll do it." Sterling nodded, a ghost of a smile touching his lips. "Good. We start tomorrow, but there's one more thing you need to see. Something I found in the deeper layers of their encrypted files." He turned back to the monitors and tapped a few keys. A new folder opened, titled Legacy. He pulled up a single, grainy photograph. It was taken at a crowded gala, maybe 10 years ago. In the center was Margaret, looking younger and more radiant, but it was the man standing next to her that made the blood drain from my face. He was tall, with the same deep-set eyes I saw in the mirror every morning. The man I had buried 5 years ago, my father. "My father worked for them," I whispered, leaning closer to the screen. "It's worse than that, Elena," Sterling said, his eyes fixed on mine. "Look at what he's holding." In the photo, my father was handing a heavy, unmarked black case to a man whose face was obscured by the shadows. But on the man's wrist was a very distinct, one-of-a-kind watch. I looked down at Alexander Sterling's wrist. The watch was identical. "You didn't just hire me for revenge, did you?" I gasped, backing away from him. "You were there. You were part of this." Sterling didn't move, but the temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. "I was there, Elena, but I wasn't the one who gave the order to kill him." My breath hitched. "What? He died in a car accident. It was a rainy night, just like—" "It wasn't an accident," Sterling said, his voice dropping to a whisper. "And the person who cut his brakes is in that house right now. But that's not the secret that should scare you. Look at the date on the photo." I looked. The date was 3 days ago. My father wasn't dead. And according to the GPS coordinates flashing at the bottom of the image, he was being held in the one place I was never allowed to go. "He's in the East Wing," I breathed, the realization hitting me like a physical blow. "He's been here the whole time." "Not exactly," Sterling said, his expression becoming unreadable. "He's not a prisoner, Elena. He's the one running the entire operation, and he's been waiting for you to arrive." Before I could process the words, a loud, piercing alarm began to blare throughout the estate. The monitors turned blood red, and a mechanical voice echoed through the room. "Perimeter breach! Unauthorized entry in the East Wing!" Sterling's face went pale. "He's moving!" he hissed, grabbing my arm. "We have to go, now!" As he pulled me toward the stairs, the main monitor zoomed in on the front gate. A fleet of black SUVs was smashing through the iron bars, and the lead vehicle had a logo I recognized all too well. It was the symbol of the very company my father had supposedly died working for. But as the doors of the first SUV opened, it wasn't a group of criminals that stepped out. It was a team of men in tactical gear, and the man leading them was Mark. He wasn't looking for me. He was looking at the East Wing, and he was carrying an illegal weapon, his face twisted in a look of pure, murderous rage. "He's not here for the files, Elena," Sterling whispered as we hit the top of the stairs. "He's here to finish what his mother started. He's here to kill your father." At that moment, the glass walls of the gallery shattered. The sound was deafening, a crystalline explosion that felt like the world was tearing apart. Shards of reinforced glass rained down like lethal diamonds, slicing into the expensive rugs and the polished floor. Alexander Sterling didn't hesitate. He tackled me to the ground, shielding my body with his own as the first wave of intruders vaulted through the jagged frames. "Stay down!" he hissed, his voice barely audible over the roar of the wind and the screeching alarm. I looked up through the chaos and saw Mark. He wasn't the husband I remembered. His face was contorted with a frantic, desperate energy. He was holding an illegal weapon, swinging it wildly as he screamed for my father. Behind him, men in tactical gear, criminals hired by Margaret to clean up their mess, began to fan out, their boots crunching on the glass. "Where is he, Sterling?" Mark roared, his voice cracking. "My mother wants the final keys to the network. Give us the old man, and maybe we'll let Elena live." Sterling pulled me toward the service elevator behind the gallery wall. "They don't know the layout as well as I do," he whispered, pressing a series of hidden buttons. "The East Wing isn't just a wing, Elena. It's a bunker." As the elevator descended, Sterling grabbed a tablet from a wall mount. He began typing furiously. "I've been running an internal security check on their entire organized scheme for 3 years. Your father, he was the one who reached out to me. He realized what Margaret was doing, how she was using his logistics company to move prohibited substances across the border. He tried to stop her, and she staged his accident. But he survived, and I've been keeping him here, hidden, while we built the case to dismantle her entire network." The elevator doors hissed open to a sterile white hallway. At the end of it stood a heavy steel door. Sterling swiped his hand over a biometric scanner, and the door swung open. Standing there, leaning heavily on a cane but with eyes as sharp as I remembered, was my father, Arthur. "Elena," he breathed, his voice trembling. There was no time for a reunion. The sound of explosions echoed from above. Margaret's team was breaching the lower levels. "They're coming for the encryption keys," my father said, clutching a small device. "If Margaret gets these, she can wipe the evidence of the organized scheme and disappear with the billions they've laundered. And she'll leave you and Sterling to face a tashkoy obvinenia. She's already planted the evidence to make it look like this was your operation." "Not today," I said, a cold, hard clarity settling over me. I looked at the monitors in the room, showing Mark and his men tearing through the upper floors. I saw Margaret sitting in the lead SUV at the gate, her face calm, like a queen watching a conquest. "Sterling, can you patch me into the estate's external speakers?" I asked. He looked at me, surprised, then nodded. "I can do better. I can patch you into the live feed that's currently being recorded by the Internal Security Service. Every word said in this house is being streamed to a secure server at the district attorney's office." I grabbed the headset. "Mark!" My voice boomed through the house, echoing in the gallery where he stood. "It's over. I have the keys, and I have the proof that you were the one who signed for the shipments in my name. I have the footage of you and your mother discussing how to frame me." Mark froze. He looked around the room, his eyes wide with panic. "Elena, you're lying. You have nothing." "I have everything, Mark," I said, my voice steady. "I have the man you thought you killed. I have your father-in-law, Arthur, and he's ready to tell the world exactly what Margaret did." The mention of my father sent Mark into a tailspin. He began to argue with the men he'd brought, his leadership crumbling under the weight of his own cowardice. Above him, on the main monitors, I saw the lights of a dozen black sedans racing up the driveway. It wasn't more radicals. It was the actual Internal Security Service, the real law enforcement that Sterling had been coordinating with. Margaret saw them too. She tried to order her driver to floor it, but Sterling had already remotely locked the estate gates. Her SUV slammed into the reinforced iron, coming to a dead stop. The next hour was a blur of flashing lights and shouted commands. I watched on the screens as Mark was pinned to the glass-covered floor and handcuffed. He cried. He actually cried, begging for mercy, blaming his mother for everything. Margaret was dragged from her car, her silk robe ruined, her face a mask of pure, impotent rage, as she was informed she would be facing dozens of years in a high-security facility. When the dust settled, Sterling and I led my father out into the cool night air. The rain had stopped. My father gripped my hand. "I'm sorry I stayed away, Elena. I thought it was the only way to keep you safe." "You're safe now, Dad," I whispered. Sterling stood a few feet away talking to a high-ranking official. He looked back at me, his expression softening for the first time since I'd met him. He walked over, handing me a thick envelope. "What's this?" I asked. "Your final paycheck," he said, "and the deed to a property in the city. It's registered in your name. Legally, this time. It's a start." "I was just a cleaning lady," I said, looking at the chaos of the ruined estate. "No," Sterling said, a small smile playing on his lips. "You were the only one brave enough to walk into the lion's den. And Elena, if you ever need a job that doesn't involve scrubbing floors, my firm is always looking for someone with your attention to detail." I looked out over the ocean as the sun began to rise. I had been kicked out with $42 and a broken heart. Now I had my father back, my name was cleared, and the people who tried to destroy me were heading to a huge sentence they would never finish. I wasn't a ghost anymore. I was finally, for the first time in my life, the one in control. And as I watched the police cars haul Margaret and Mark away, I knew one thing for certain: the cleaning was finally done.